Welcome to COVID and Climate Change Correlations, a weekly video podcast where I, Daniel Sanderson, engage in a stimulating conversation with post-Keynesian economist Steve Keen. Steve, you're back in virtual studio again, and I want to thank you again for joining us and spending another hour with us and with this growing audience. It's my wholehearted intention to have as many people pay attention to your work. And today's episode, we're actually going to be spending some time on the Minsky software. And the Minsky software is integral to your work and to the validation of your work, both mathematically and I guess programmatically. I guess, right? Is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. It's I've always argued that economics has to be about dynamics, and it's ridiculous to even say that because of course the economy is changing over time. It's not only dynamic; it's evolutionary. But economics has been dominated by a way of thinking that says it's all about equilibrium, which is a hangover from the 19th century. So I knew I needed a platform to be able to show how you model the economy, at least as a dynamic, if not actually also an evolutionary process. And the existing platforms didn't cut it for me in two main ways. One is they didn't make it easy to handle money, and that's where I invented something absolutely brand new in Minsky, which using double entry bookkeeping tables to generate models of financial dynamics. But also I wanted to make it more visual and more obviously mathematical. A lot of these existing programs hide the mathematics behind text boxes. So Minsky is very different on that front. So yeah, it's become integral to how I work. The first thing I do when I want to work out some idea is I load Minsky.
Well, this is really interesting, and I want to focus just on the words of double entry bookkeeping. You're talking about some, we've talked about this before. Your economic models, I feel, have the potential to really, really affect positive change in the world. You would probably describe it as, well, it just describes reality better. But
yeah.
My point on it is this move to a double entry bookkeeping. It sounds so simple. It's like how did we miss it? Or how come it's so simple and yet it's just so far away for so long?
Yeah, it is bizarre, and it is one of these things that happens in a very iterative way. So, like when I was first trying to build models of financial flows, I work in strict differential equations. I'd be writing differential equations linking debt, loans to deposits and stuff like that. And it was always possible to make an error. Like you change one differential equation for loans and you don't make the same change to the differential equation for deposits, and you stuff up your model. And how do you keep track of all this stuff? And so initially I was working actually with Wynne Godley. And those who don't know Wynne Godley's name, Wynne was the person who developed the whole idea of stock flow consistent modeling, and a wonderful, charming, eclectic human being. He was a concert standard oboe player. He was so handsome that he was used as the model for St. George, I believe it was, for a statue in Cambridge. He drove a sports car, and this I'm talking when he's 70s and 80s. He was turning up to work in a rather flash little MG. So very, very much a Renaissance man. And he developed the idea of stock flow consistent modeling, where every flow went from somewhere and ended up somewhere. And he had software written by Francis Cripps, I think it was, his colleague and all that. So I was working next to him and seeing how he was using tables. And then finally the idea occurred to me, well, maybe I can use tables to build my differential equations. And I then programmed that very rapidly in a program called MathCAD. And then finally, when the Institute for New Economic Thinking started funding non-orthodox work in economics, I applied for money for them to turn my idea that I was using in this mathematics program called MathCAD across to a dedicated program called Minsky. So, that all took from, say, about year 2000 to about year 2012 before Minsky actually came into existence.
Wow, that's very interesting. So today we're going to look at doing a bit of a test run, and where does your mind go in terms of just kind of taking us out for a test drive? Like what's where do you really start? What are
the easiest one is the crazy one, and that is how is money created? Because, pardon me, playing with my microphone here, is the stand has become loose, and I'm not quite certain why. Anyway, I have to live with it. Looks like the parts of my hardware have fallen off. The electronic, not biological.
I thought that was a function of age. I mean, no, that's okay. All right, keep going.
Okay. So probably the easiest way is to start with actually what Minsky was designed to do, was explain how money is created, because that is the big sticking point between the mainstream, people like Paul Krugman, Alan Blinder, what's his name, Gregory Mankiw, all the neoclassicals who ignore money, and people like myself who say money is the foundation of economics. Minsky was designed to show they're wrong and I'm right, fundamentally, and not in a way of saying, gotcha. This is simply, look, you guys don't understand double entry bookkeeping. And so let's start with showing how money is created. Beauty. Okay, so this is the typical system dynamics program. If you want, this is the design canvas. So you place everything a bit like, imagine like paint. You're painting something, only what you're painting is a model rather than your Mona Lisa. So, like for example, if you want to input a switch onto the program, click on that. The switch gets attached to your mouse, and then you click somewhere, and the switch is left there. If you want to add a plus key, for example, click here. There's a plus key. Suck to the mouse, click, and it stays there. I'm just going to delete those two because what I want to do is start explaining how money is created. And what I'm going to do is click on the what's called the godly table, and that's looks like a bank. So what you get, a little bank icon. Same story. You click, it's attached to the cursor. Click somewhere, and it stays on the canvas. And then we make very, very heavy use of the right mouse button. So when you click the right mouse button, you get this menu, and you get your description. My cat is playing with the stand of my camera. Pardon that happening just then. What are you doing, you silly little thing? I'm going to go into what's called editor mode, and that lets me show the table on screen as I build it. But I'll also bring up the window, and I'll see if bringing up the window actually works. So if I choose open the godly table, can you see that table now?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the real design window. And you can make it larger, and you can make the elements larger. So I'm making it larger. I'll just stretch this out a bit so it's nice and visible for everybody who watches this. So the whole idea of the way banking operates, and this is, by the way, I'm the son of a banker. Okay, my father, Al B. Keane, was a banker in the Commonwealth Bank in Australia. And he was a branch manager down at Circular Quay when he retired, but he actually designed the bank's accounting system. And he wrote the bank's operations manual. He brought in the digital currency. He was on the digital currency board, the decimal currency board for Australia. And he was in the settlements accounts for the banking system. So he was the Commonwealth Bank representative who'd go to the Reserve Bank every day to be involved in the internal settlements with them in the Westpac Bank, or the Bank of New South Wales, as it was called at the time, and so on. So I never actually talked the stuff with Dad, but it's all the stuff he did for a living. So a bank divides, anyone can divide their what they own, what they owe, and what their net worth is. And what Minsky is designed to automate that in terms of economics. And what I'm looking at here are assets which are a claim you have on somebody else, okay? And liabilities are a claim somebody else has on you. Now, if you're working just at the level of financial claims, somebody's claim on you, and your claim, if you look at it, their claim on you is their asset. Their claim on you is your liability. When you add them all up, the whole thing nets to zero. But you can be in positive equity, and they can be in negative equity. Now, there are other assets, things you own, which nobody else has any claim on. So they're not included in this way of modeling. And we could extend that, but I'm really looking at financial claims. So the equity column comes out as being a net worth, and the sum of all net worths, because of the sum of everybody's claim and everybody else's, comes out to zero. Now, according to neoclassical economists, that means banks can't create money. Okay? and they have what they call the model of loanable funds. What I'm going to do first of all is explain how they see the bank system operates. So we all know that banks have assets which we call reserves. What I'm just going to do is type the word reserves into here as an asset of the banking system. And then the bank has liabilities. And I'm going to say, well, it has some people who are savers, who have deposit accounts, and other people who are borrowers, who have deposit accounts, okay? And then the banking system itself, the overall bank equity, I'm guessing if you imagine I've got a dash between bank and the letter E, that's a command to Minsky to say, show the E as a subscript, okay? Now, let's say we start with, say, reserves of 100, and the savers have 80 in reserves, and the borrowers have 10 in reserves, and the bank net equity is 10. That's our initial condition. And then I can add additional assets if I want to by clicking on this button here, which creates an extra column here. I can add extra liabilities by doing the same thing. The minus gets rid of it. So there's a chance to modify the model as I go along. If I click here, I add my first operation. Let's say I have lent money. Now, what the neoclassicals think is it's the savers who are lending to the borrowers. So you have minus loan, let's say, which money coming out of the savers account, and that turns up in the borrower's account. Okay? The saver lends to the borrower. Okay, and then you have pay interest. So that's going to be interest taken out of the borrower's account and paid into the saver's account. Okay, and then you have to repay the loan. What you have here is you'd have money coming out of this account minus repay, and it goes into that account. Now, you notice the bank is making, there's nothing the bank is doing here, okay? The bank is like a passive vehicle, what's going on. And that's the vision that neoclassicals have of banks being intermediaries who simply facilitate lending from one non-bank to another non-bank. That's what's called the model of loanable funds. Now, if I click back over on the main window here, you see Minsky has reproduced that on the screen as well. And I'm going to add the fact that it shows the variables here as well. So this is the loan, interest, and repay of the flows coming into the system on the stocks, the reserves, savers, borrowers, and bank equity. And that's the basic vision that Minsky has of. Just going to make that one make that a bit smaller. Yeah, we've got to work on some aspects of the program. Those arrows should really be around the overall box up there. So that's just showing the basic layout. Now that's what they think banks do. Well, what actually banks do, I'm just going to add an extra asset here, is that banks make loans. Okay? Now, how do I have to rearrange this to show that the way that banks actually operate? Well, I can drag this over here. Now, watch what happens over here. This little column here is applying what's called the fundamental law of accounting. And that's assets minus liabilities minus equity has to equal 0. If it doesn't equal 0, you've made a mistake. So when you look at lending coming from a saver to a borrower, the saver's bank account goes down, the borrower's account goes up. Okay, so you have a minus here and a plus here. And it's just what it is going on is when you see how neoclassicals think about what banks actually do and what lending actually is, it's just reallocating existing money. It's not creating new money. Now, as soon as I drag this over here, Minsky, so you've got an error. Okay. Okay. What's actually going on is I've got to get rid of that minus sign. Now it's correct. And what it's saying is your loan you're making increases the liability of the banking sector and increases the assets just as much. Okay. Now I've got to rearrange again. Let's just drag interest is now paid to the bank, which is over here, and repay goes over here. And I've now got to type a minus in some of the repay. And so now I've changed it from the way that the neoclassicals think the banks operate to the way the banks actually do operate. And notice that now the saver is not even in the picture. Okay, loans are an operation between a borrower and the bank. The bank creates money by lending. So the loan increases the borrower's deposit account, which is creating money. It increases the asset of the banking sector. So the increase in the assets matches the increase in the liability. Interest is a payment from the borrower to the bank, and repayment of debt reduces the money in the bank account. So to repay the money, you're actually reducing the amount of money in circulation, and you're also reducing the assets. Now, those two visions of how banks operate are completely different. One is technically wrong, and the other is technically right. This one, which is what the neoclassicals teach in their textbooks, let's actually fix up the mathematics again there. It's minus loan, and that's going to be plus repay. That is wrong. And the authority to saying it's wrong is the Bank of England and the Bundesbank have both said that model is categorically wrong. That is not what banks do, okay? But that's what they still teach. If you read Krugman, if you read Mankiw, any of the macroeconomic textbooks, and if you look at the models they write, with the sole exception of my good friend Michael Kumov, who's the only neoclassical economist who models money properly, they all model it as if banks are just intermediaries. Now, as soon as you say banks actually lend, whoops, that was a mistake, let's fix that up, then they're not intermediaries, they're fundamental, they're operators, they're fundamentally part of the economy, and if you leave banks out, you're not going to understand how the economy operates, because one of the major factors is missing. So that's just at the very simple level of saying, I'll actually change this back to being the bank icon here, just easier to do that. So that's seeing it from the point of view of just the banking sector. I'll just type up here, this is the banking sector's view. The banking sector's view of the economy. But I've actually, so Minsky's power is not just that it lets you, do the logic as I've shown here. It also says, well, and what's an asset for somebody must be a liability for somebody else. So you can build an integrated model here, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm now going to bring in another godly table, and I'm going to call this one savers. Another one, and call this one borrowers. Pardon me. It's very sensitive to, we want to open the godly table. Hang on, I want to go to the title, pardon me. So these are all popping off screen as I open those borrowers. But I also need to have the central bank, because the central bank has reserves. And let's now complete this model from that point of view. So I come to savers and open their godly table. Then what Minsky first of all does is say, well, what is an asset for somebody else is a liability for you. Okay, so and the banking sector, if I go back to the banking sector's view there, I'll just go over and show the banking sector again. Let's see. There's the banking sector's view. So it's got loans as an asset and savers as a liability. So if I click here in having the table for the savers, it's going to say, well, what liabilities haven't been shown as an asset of somebody else? Well, that's savers. So I click that here, and I'm going to have savers equity. At the moment, they're worth 80, because they don't have any liabilities. But now let's go, that's the savers done. And now you see savers have got those two elements there. Let's go to the borrowers. Now they've got an asset, which is the borrower's account, but they've also got a liability, which are loans. And now Minsky is saying, well, here's the operation between your assets and liabilities. Now we have borrowers' equity. So the interest payment obviously comes out of their equity. And the loan, I've got nothing in the loan so far. I haven't actually typed that inside there, and no loans are shown up initially. But that's now the situation from the point of view of those three elements of the banking system. And the final one is the, the central bank. Open up its godly table, and it has the only thing left out of their reserves or a liability. So what you might have here is loans by the central bank to the banks. For example, that's using subscripts and superscripts to indicate it. And then you have the central bank equity, and I presume those loans are 100. Now what you've got is an integrated view of the economy where everybody's assets and liabilities are summed. I'll make this one a bit smaller. And you can keep on going. That's just a fairly small toy model that I've done so far. But the hard part is, well, not the hard part, that explains the overall logic. Now, what you can see in this, I'll just illustrate the power of thinking this way. For a start, it shows that the fact that because one thing is somebody's asset and somebody else's liability, that doesn't mean you can't create money. But you will see people like Krugman say, because somebody's asset is somebody else's liability, therefore banking doesn't create money. Garbage, okay? You have to show that, and if you have people swapping money for, like if you sent me $100 and I sent you one of my mouse in return, your account would go up by 100, mine would go down by 100. Oh, I've made a little mistake there, pardon me. I really have stuffed this up, haven't I? Let's see. Yeah, be careful with the mouse. You can do things you don't intend doing with Minsky fairly rapid. That's now correct. Okay. Me sending you money in return for something you send back to me or vice versa swaps the liabilities around. But if I go to the bank and with my credit card and go to a shop and say I want to buy that mouse and I swipe the credit card, then $100 gets added to the bank account of the retailer. $100 gets added to my debt to the bank, and the bank's assets rise by 100, and so that is creating money. Okay, so when you swipe your credit card, you create money. When you repay your credit card, you destroy money, inverted commas. So that is absolutely essential for understanding how banking operates, and that's just the beginning of it. The next thing you want to do is make a mathematical model out of it. And I'll quickly illustrate how that is done. I'm going to copy the word interest down and bring it back onto the canvas. And we know that the amount of interest you pay is equal to the loans multiplied by the rate of interest. If I type, say, R underscore loan for the rate of interest on loans, and I'm going to make a deliberate mistake here. Notice how that's got it, RL subscript and then OANS. That's because we're using a standard called LaTeX for doing formatting. So when you type an underscore, that tells LaTeX to subscript the next character, unless you put it inside curly brackets, and then it'll subscript the whole thing. I'm going to say this is a parameter, and let's say the value of the interest rate is 5%, but it could be as high as, say, 20%, and might be as low as, say, 1%. We're seeing interest rates that low, and the step size is 1%. Then I now want to multiply loans by the rate of interest to get the interest payment. And you can simply type on the screen the multiply key. And then I'll just zoom in here. And there are little, when you put the mouse over an object in Minsky, you can move it around as I'm doing there. Or when you're in a circle, when you click and drag, you bring out an arrow.
Oh, that's cool.
The arrow then attaches to the nearest input port on the nearest object. And I've got to bring it slightly closer than that. And that is now saying interest is equal to loans multiplied by the rate of interest.
You've got all your logical operators in there with the flow chart.
Yeah. So you set up a fairly complicated flow chart. So the first stage in Minsky is simply laying out the logic of the financial flows using double entry bookkeeping. And the second stage is taking that logic and then building a mathematical model using these elements of the system as a flow chart. Now, there's nothing, the way I've got it set up at the moment, I don't have any money in this. So I'm just going to say, let's say the loans are 30. And therefore the bank's equity is actually 30. And let's see, hang on. I've got an excess there, so it'll be 20. Yeah, hang on, so 20. Oh no, hang on. 40. Okay. So there's the proper situation. And I've got to go across to the borrowers and show the loaners actually. Minsky updates when I save and reload. It's not updating fast enough on this. So the equity, the borrower's equity is now minus 20 and negative equity compared to the bank. Now, if I just recalculate this, you can see now what Minsky is doing initially. There are loans of 30, and the rate of interest is, that's 5%, 0.05. So 5% of 30 is $1.50. That's your interest payment. And then because you don't have any repayment going on here, then that is just going to maintain. But what will happen over time if I actually graph this? I'll now bring a graph down. Let's say we want to take a look at the
oh, this is cool.
Okay.
I like it.
Good. There's the borrower's equity there. And then let's go for the bank's equity here. So take a copy of that. And I'll just drag this over to get a bit more space here so I can make the graph larger. Hang on. So it's got all the usual, but by the way, the usual features with the things I'm doing right now, like using a rubber band and dragging and stuff like that, that cost a large amount of money to get programmed. It didn't happen in the previous version. It's now possible. And I know what's happening here.
Look at that.
Okay, rising equity of the bank is coming at the expense of declining equity of the borrower. So it's an incomplete model, but that's the sort of thing you can start building with Minsky. And the idea is you can actually see what's happening dynamically. You run the model and you can see what's happening over time. Now, if I want to go to a more complete model than that, I'll save that as it is. I'll call this Daniel. Hang on a second. I'll whack it in. No, where can I put it? Just on the desktop. Let's see. I'll put it there and I'll move it later. That's the essence of modeling in Minsky. I'll just actually stop presenting now. So, okay, that's the essence of modeling in it. And of course, you can go a lot further than that. And we might do that today, and we might do it later. But that's the fundamental thing. So even just laying out the double entry bookkeeping tells you mainstream economics is wrong.
Yeah, yeah. That's really fascinating. I think, I mean, so who's is this a free download that someone can?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. If you go to SourceForge, I'll just actually, pardon me. I'll again share my screen once more and show this. So here we go, a window, and it's going to be that one, okay. So this is Minsky's webpage on SourceForge. Now, before anybody who's a techno complains, yes, we have a GitHub page as well. So there's a big battle in the programming world between GitHub and SourceForge, and everybody's down on SourceForge and up on GitHub. I'm a bit agnostic on the whole thing. We started using SourceForge 10 years ago. All our documentation, discussion of bugs and stuff like that is stored there. We're just going to stay there, okay? We have it in, you can go to GitHub as well. Let's see where the GitHub is. There's, that's an idiot called Cochrane talking about something he doesn't understand. Minsky. I thought I had GitHub here. I should just type it up. Let's see. Yeah. There's the GitHub page. So you can go to GitHub or you can go to SourceForge. I'll use SourceForge because you click on download, you get the latest version.
Oh, nice.
Okay. And then there are also binaries for Windows and so on. And there's beta builds. Now, we are now at the point where the release version is later than any of the betas because we've got to the release cycle. But normally, like in 6 months to a year's time, then the most recent, the most up-to-date version will be in the betas there. So, but at the moment, the thing is to do, if you have a Windows program, just click on download, and you'll then get this little window coming up, spins away for a while. And then you can't see this monster. For some reason, my save display is enormous, but you then save, you can see it downloading down here. I have down on the bottom of the window here. So it's about 140 meg. So it'll download pretty rapidly, and then click on it and install, and you have a working version of Minsky.
Is that a EXE only? No Mac version, I guess?
No, there's a Mac version as well. So if you go to, let's go back to here, then Files, and you have Mac binaries.
Oh, I see.
And there's the latest version of the Mac.
Well, congratulations. That must have been a lifetime of work condensed all into a decade, I would say.
It was a lot of work, yeah, and it's still ongoing. We still need development funding for Minsky. If I can't get grant funding, and it's really hard to get grant funding, you cannot get grant funding at a university for software, one of these stupid rules that the funders have. It's hard to persuade non-university funders to support software as well. So I've got one grant from the Institute for New Economic Thinking in 2012 and one grant from Friends Provident Foundation in 2017, and that's it. That's all the grants I've got. So if I can't get more grants in future, I'll be forced to make it a commercial program. But I'm trying to maintain it open source as long as I can.
Yeah, no kidding. But it's hard when the system works against you. There was a neuroscientist that I was following recently, and they had the same issue. Just couldn't get any grants, and you scratch your head. They're opening new doors and breaking down previous boundaries, just like you are, a different field, and there's certain things that just are not fundable, or not easily fundable.
That's right, and unfortunately, it tends to be the most useful stuff that isn't funded. Not always, of course. You get plenty. There are cranks out there, but the trouble is the mainstream in economics. They're the cranks, unfortunately. Okay, they're the ones who don't know what they're talking about, and unfortunately, they're the ones who dominate how we think about the economy. And they're the ones who get funding. They are the economists who decide which economists get funding. Because they make up at least 85% of the profession. They make up 100% of people who make grant selections. And consequently, all the neoclassical stuff gets funded. They complain about not having enough money. I would die to have, not quite, but I'd be close to dying to have an ounce of what they get for funding going across the non-orthodox work like mine.
What kind of funding do they go for? I'm just curious. It's not really a world.
There's each country has its own sort of research grants organisation. So, for example, the one I know best is the Australian Research Council, and that gets government funding. Something like, I don't know how much it would be, a few billion a year, I imagine, or more than a few, maybe. Let's say it's 10 billion a year. Well, what mainstream economists complain about is that 90% of that goes to sciences and only 10% to economics. So, like of that 10 billion, 9 billion might go to scientists and 1 billion goes to economists, and they complain they're only getting 1 billion. Of that 1 billion going to economists, you're lucky if 1 million goes to non-orthodox thinkers. You'd be very lucky if it was 1%, 0.1%.
Yeah.
So they get 99.9% of the funding. And I applied to the Australian Research Council when I was in Australia as an academic 9 times. I was turned down 9 times, including once when I was the top-ranked person at my university across all professions. This is 1 year, and only 1 year, they published the point scores given by referees. And there were 7 applicants from the University of Western Sydney whose point score was above the minimum. I mean, they go to the second round. I was number 1. I was also an early career researcher, which gives you another 5 points. So my research director said, look, you're home and hosed. You're going to have a large a large ARC grant, they call them. They're small and large. I think they're one of the large ones, a couple of $100,000 at least. And that'll let you fund your next 3 years of research. So plan the next 3 years as if you're going to have all this time for research. And then when the results came out, there were 6 people who were successful at getting a grant at Western Sydney, and I was not one of them.
Oh.
Now, what had happened is the Australian Research Council had revised my mark, my point score, from 89.25 to 76. Now, that's what neoclassicals do to non-orthodox economists.
Wow.
The lowest point score I got from any of the referees was I'm going to use the word, he's an arsehole of a neoclassical who made spurious objections and gave me 75, which is basically like, thanks for trying. The others gave me 95, 92, 90, and so on and so forth. And they revised me to 76, 1 mark above what he gave me. And therefore I didn't get the grant. And so that's typical of what happens. So because the mainstream dominates where the money goes, the mainstream gets funded and non-orthodox thinkers like myself don't get any funding.
Have you heard of the Max Planck Institute?
Yep.
I mean, this is not, do you think that that's something, it's non-conventional? I mean, it's mainstream in terms of science. Do you think you could get into a wider stream of scientific funding, something as big as the Max Planck Institute?
Oh, the trouble is that, they're used to funding, scientific research. They're not, and if they try to fund economics, they'll get a complaint from the economists. So, you can't win. So I get some funding from non-orthodox groups like that, that's true. But generally speaking, you cannot get funding for non-orthodox economics research.
Yeah.
That's what we desperately need.
But the reason it may seem weird that I brought that up, but the reason why I did bring it up is it seems that you're adding a level of empirical testability that makes it more of a scientific discipline. I think it's an opportunity for economics to grow out of the dogma, right? And so
it is, and that's why it won't happen until it's too late.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the problem. That you have a way of thinking about the economy which is correct, but it won't see the light of day because it's the same as Galileo applying to the Vatican for funding of research into why the Earth is not the centre of the universe. Good luck, Galileo. You're not going to get funding.
House arrest for him. You didn't get house arrest. That was good.
Huh?
You didn't get house arrest, so that was good.
That's true. I'm doing better on that front. Yeah.
Did you get threatened with the rack though? I mean, that must have maybe did they threaten you at all somehow or?
Oh no. I mean, people. It's not a good idea to try to threaten me. It just gets me angry. So I've had a few attempts of that nature to intimidate me. Sure, that does happen. But I just keep on doing my stuff anyway. What happens more often is people like fear takes over. So, for example, way back when I was just a junior academic, I was still a tutor. There was a member of staff at the University of New South Wales who took a strong dislike to me and was a head of the department. His nickname was Colon. I'll leave it at that. Okay. So Colon tried to make my life a misery. And one of my fellow non-orthodox economists said, look, he's a very powerful guy and you really should make your peace with him. And my answer was, if I haven't made him irrelevant to my life at some time in the future, then I regard myself as having failed. Well, trust me, he's irrelevant to my life now. Now, that means I'm now taking people like Krugman and so on and so forth. And you can't do anything because you're not part of the same power structure. So we'll continue losing until the economy they think that we live in evaporates like a puddle in the sun. Yeah,
well, nicely put. Okay, what about funding in the climate change circles? That's what I'm curious about.
That's better, but again, at the same time, you have to explain why you need the funding, and it's it's hard to do. I mean, I've now got enough prominence that I can do my work. Like I don't have to worry about teaching anymore or administration, all the nonsense that goes on at universities. So Patreon keeps me well funded. So the Patreon side means the public are letting me do this research rather than having to rely upon funding from a government body or a private body. So that's better. The negative is that I'd like to hire a research assistant or two. I'd like to hire programmers full-time to keep on working on Minsky. And I'm not getting enough money out of Patreon to do that. So there are limitations. But, I'll live with those limitations any day to get away from having to put up with the university bureaucracies and with the lack of funding that we get from mainstream funding bodies.
Yeah, and you know what? That's a plug to say anybody who's listening, keep the patronage going. As Professor Keen has pointed out in the past, this is Galileo's story all over again, and if you're religious, you can say you're doing God's work, but if you're secular, it's just the right thing to do. On that note, Steve, do you have any closing words for this week's episode?
No, just basically, I'd love people to download Minsky and take a look at it. One thing which, of course, you need a manual for Minsky, and one of the things I haven't had time to do is write a proper manual. However, there is now a manual of sorts. I'll actually do a screen share again. Let's do that. Okay, this one, okay. So that's my Prof. Steve Keen website. And you'll notice this is the top menu up here. Pardon me. And there's Minsky. And you can this takes you to download the software. And then this is a manual, which I'm still writing. It's incomplete. But if you click on that, you'll get a PDF giving you a reasonable explanation of how Minsky operates. And then it covers all the models. I'm going to continue loading them up here that I use in my new book, The New Economics and Manifesto, which is coming out hopefully in October. So that's the site to go to, and I'll improve it over time.
What's the update on the article for Royal Society?
That's about a week and a half from being finished, I think, and submitted.
Wow.
Yeah.
Exciting. We should, I don't know, I feel like having some sort of like a party for you, but
It'll obviously be won by distance, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, no, that's right. So do you get the acknowledgement that you've submitted, and does anybody give you feedback? When does the feedback start coming? Is that just
the usual process in academic refereeing? First of all, you send the paper to a journal.
Yeah.
The journal will then assign it to an editor. The editor often does what they call a desk reject. So if the editor thinks it's not worth publishing, then 90% of papers get rejected at that point. Then it gets passed to referees, normally 2 referees, and the referees will then make comments, suggestions, etc., etc. And if they give you what they call a revise and resubmit, then you take back their comments and work through those comments. And finally, you send it back. The referees will often tell the editor they don't want to see the revised version so long as the editor's happy the revisions have been done. Send that all back. The process can take anywhere from 3 months to 3 years.
Oh, shit. Okay.
I'm hoping in this case, because this is an invited paper, we'll be closer to the 3-month mark.
Are you expecting a desk refusal?
No, not expecting that. I mean, when what we exposed with the Nordhaus in my globalization paper alone is the reason the proceedings of the Royal Society got in touch. They thought scientists need to know this as well, and scientists won't read globalization, but they will read proceedings. So it's to get in front of scientists. Only they've got to have done an adequate enough job for scientists to understand why they can't trust what economists have done on climate change. That's the only thing necessary. It's certainly done that, so it'll get past the editor. It's then up to the referees.
Right on. Okay, well, we'll keep, going with you every step of the way. And, to everybody out there, thank you for joining. Thank you for supporting. And until next week, thank you, Steve.
Thank you, mate. And I'll be on time next time.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.